and I gave a presentation at the gravesite service for the immediate family. Some of the family members asked if I could do that again here, just to share some of the highlights of Ken's life and some of the insights into what a great man he was. And I agreed to do that. It's a little bigger crowd, but I would like to share this with you. Mary asked me to say these words for the family, and I'm very honored to be here to talk about my cousin and my friend. Over the last few weeks, I've been thinking a lot about Ken with great clarity and detail. My wife Connie and I would sit in the living room and we would spend time remembering him and talking about him. I noticed during our conversation certain words kept resurfacing. Words such as upbeat, positive, sincere, good listener, critical thinker, honest opinions, engaging conversation, problem solver, unconventional and unique. This man I want to talk about today, this wonderful man who is part of our family, I'm glad to be here. However, first I want to tell you a little story about Mary and Kenny. One time many years ago, Ken shared with me how he met Mary. He had been in the United States Air Force since May of 1961 at the age of 19 for about a 4-year term, and eventually got out of the military on August 9, 1965. Ken was driving down the road one day. In fact, I thought it was Waller Road, but I think Mary said it was 96th. And he spots this slender, good-looking girl walking along the shoulder in the same direction that he was driving. He was in his early 20s at this time, being born on November 15, 1942. He starts taking a double take, and he's thinking to myself, my oh my, where did this beauty come from? As he passes her, he starts looking in his rearview mirror, and now he's saying to himself, I want to meet this girl. He immediately makes a U-turn in the middle of the road and comes back and starts up a conversation with her. And we all know how our Ken can start up conversations with people. That day materially changed his life, for his future would now include this woman. He would eventually meet his new daughter, Lorena. And their two sons, Kevin and Ryan, would come later. That one moment would prove to evolve into a lifetime of a million experiences that would create this nucleus Nilsen family who would come to love each other, respect each other, and support each other in both good times and hard times. A few weeks ago, Kev told me a story when he was visiting his dad up at the hospital. Ken asked his son to do something for him. He said it was very important and you have to do exactly as I asked. Ken told Kev, I got this card for your mother in the glove box of my pickup truck. I have a gift that I have wrapped for her at another location. I want you to gather these things up, and I want you to give them to her on this particular date. No matter how things are going, where I'm at, or what I'm doing, it must happen on this date. This is the anniversary of the first day that I met your mother. Now I am sure Mary and Ken celebrate their wedding anniversary like most of us married folks. However, I am also certain that Ken cherished the first day he met Mary as much as he did when he married her 48 years ago on March 27, 1965. A few weeks ago, Lorena called me at my home. As Rhonda mentioned, she could not be here with us. She has her own battles going on right now. She heard I was going to be up here talking about her dad, and we had a great telephone conversation. She shared some things with me about her dad. And I am here now on her behalf to share them with you. Her dad always told her, I married the woman and loved the daughter. This meant so much to Lorena. Without Ken, she said, I might have never had a great dad, a real dad, and there is a difference. Her life would have never been so enriched as it had been had it not been for him. His influence shaped and molded much of who she would become. He helped to make her strong, reliant, independent. It was his influence that gave her confidence in herself, even a sense of humor, no matter what the challenge, to understand that life is good, that disappointments and struggles are part of life, that can help people to grow and become more. How important this must be for her at this critical time in her life. Lorena told me her dad taught her a little saying. He said, "Honey, you will always be fine in life if wherever you go, you can make a friend." Kenny's niece Rhonda had a Facebook post. Uncle Ken strived to keep the family together with one email, one phone call, and one handshake. How true these comments are when it comes to Ken. He was a patient man when it came to building relationships, and many times he tried to see the best in people, even though he may not have necessarily agreed or even liked them. He always tried to find out what makes people tick, what makes them do the things they do and think the way they think. Most of us would call that understanding. He gave the benefit of the doubt and tried to understand people, notwithstanding possible shortcomings. Another bit of wisdom that Lorena shared with me over the telephone, her dad used to always tell her, "You can learn so much from your life experiences. However, your life will be so much more enriched if you read books." Ken and I had several things in common in terms of books we read, subject matters we discussed, and sharing opportunities for experiences and road trips. I have a whole file jacket at my home with emails and handwritten notes and maps that Kenny and I have shared with each other, planning some of these trips. Ken knew I enjoyed studying history, and he would read a series of historical fiction books, and he would email me and say, "Try these books." We were both interested in the scablands of eastern Washington, which was a geographically formed 10 million years ago during the Ice Age floods. I was attending lectures in Leavenworth and reading books, and we would discuss these in great detail. We talked about and planned road trips together over in the scablands. I have this book I brought with me, Norwegian Folk Tales, which Lorena sent to her dad, as I understand with a t-shirt, which I haven't seen yet. But as I understand, Lorena was looking through this book, and she saw it's short stories, folk tales from the old country. It was written in the mid-1800s and published in English about 100 years ago. And Lorena told her mom that she read some of these stories in here. She remembered her grandfather, Augie, putting the kids up on his lap, Lorena, Kev, and Ryan, and telling these stories to them from memory. So it was very special for her, and she sent this up to Mary along with the t-shirt. Ken was a personal man. He sincerely cared about people. He had empathy for those who had frailties, problems, and struggles in life. He was not a pushover, go with the prevailing current, save the world type of a guy. However, if you asked him to help and showed him you were willing to help yourself, he would do everything in his power to support you. This is the definition of a Norwegian, it looks like. I'll let you read this.
Read that on your own time.
This will fit perfectly up here, I think. Ken rooted for the underdog because he knew from his own life that good things can only come with hard work. He always loved a challenge. He thought creatively, and he wanted to be the one to come up with a solution. Ken had a great work ethic that he most likely got from his parents. His dad, my uncle Augie, was born in Norway over 100 years ago on November 1st, 1911, in a farmhouse near a small town called Sandnes. I have actually been to and inside this farmhouse myself with the permission of the current owner. It is larger now with room additions, and the farm is now a neighborhood. Ken's mother, Catherine, was Norwegian. She was born on July 6, 1915 in Birch Hill, Saskatchewan, in Canada. As many of you know, our family immigrated from the docks of Stavanger, Norway, via a 10-day cruise across the Atlantic Ocean on the steamship Stavanger Fjord, through Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada. During this time, Ellis Island was closed temporarily, and you might say our family came into the country through the back door. From there, it was 10 days overland travel on the Canadian National Railroad to Vancouver, British Columbia, before migrating down to Tacoma. My Uncle Augie immigrated from Norway, like most of our family from that generation. And he had to work hard to make it in his new country. It was the sweat on his brow as a railroad blacksmith at the Northern Pacific South Tacoma Railroad shops, and the muscles in his back that carried the day. He actually worked shoulder to shoulder with my grandfather, Peter Thomassen, who had also came over from Norway on the Stavanger Fjord. Ken had a zest for life. He loved life one day at a time. He really did not have much time for slackers or people with negative attitudes. Time was too precious for him to hang out with someone who was not engaged in the business of living. However, he might ask that same person to go fishing with him the next day for a little talk.
Little attitude adjustment.
He worked hard, just like he saw his dad work hard. He made personal sacrifices away from home for extended periods of time to support his family in such places as Brazil, Argentina, the Dominican Republic, the Republic of Ghana. And he rotated in and out of these countries many times during the course of his work. He never complained. It was just the opposite. He considered the challenge of work as an opportunity to demonstrate who he was, what he knew intellectually, what he could do for you, how he could take your problem and turn it into a Ken Nilsen solution. Ken started his career on November 11th, 1965, and after 38 years, 4 months, and 6 days, he retired from the same company on February 17, 2004. A company that had many names over the years: Western Electric, AT&T Technologies, and finally Lucent Technologies. Ken was engaging in conversation. He always listened carefully. For me, when I talked to him, I could actually hear the wheels and gears grinding in his mind, because he was going to help me try to solve my problem. He was smart and usually expressed a responsive, creative opinion about what you may have said that was designed to help you. He forced you to think from a different perspective, to think for yourself. I know on more than one occasion I changed my course of direction directly as a result of my conversation with Ken. For me, that old cliche, talk is cheap, has nothing to do with Ken. He always responded in a material way when you needed help. Sometimes it was with words of encouragement, other times with a lending hand. It was not that long ago that Ken and Mary stopped by my Uncle Harold and Aunt Doris for a simple cup of coffee and a short visit. My Uncle Harold made the comment he was dealing with this leaky pipe in his bathroom. Well, Ken perked up. He said, "Show me." The next thing we knew, we had a pipe wrench. 6 hours later, the leak was fixed.
6 hours later. Oh.
That was Ken. Ken would never back away from a challenge. Do we all remember the multi-year house renovation off the 62nd and Waller Road? Put that one on HGTV. That project would even make the Property Brothers nervous. Or maybe we shouldn't put it on HTV because Ken forgot to get the building permit. I recall Kevin and Ryan were just little guys. I was probably still in college, but both of his sons were on that roof, hammers in hand, putting down shingles. I remember one day, it was a hot one, a scorcher, and the boys had worked hard. They had a good productive day on the roof. That afternoon, the hottest part of the day, Ken called the boys off the roof, and he took out his wallet. He gave them a few bucks. He went in and called a family member and have them come over and take his sons out to Uncle Guthrie and Aunt Usta's for a swim in American Lake. That was Ken. He believed if you worked hard, if you were productive in your endeavors, you deserved a reward. Another story I wanted to tell you about the roofing excursion was one day we decided to stack a bunch of shingles up on the roof for roofing the next morning. Well, the next morning Ken called my dad, Harry. He said the west end of the roof was collapsing because of all the weight of the shingles. Well, we all rushed over there, and about 15 people showed up in 45 minutes. I remember my dad went down to the railroad shops where he worked, and we brought up some big railroad jacks, and we got the substructure back up and secured. This is how it was. If you had a project or a problem, you called your family. Connie and I built on a new addition to our first home way back when. And we did the whole thing with the help of family. We don't want to put that one on HTV either, because Danny forgot to get the building permit. Ken loved people, all people. During his travels over many years working in other countries, he was a great ambassador for humanity. He loved to pass on knowledge, to teach people how to be better than they were before they met him. He promoted understanding and friendship. He not only helped and encouraged all those workers in those other countries on his crew to learn their new jobs, after work he went home with them to meet their parents and their siblings. He sat down at their dinner table, took time with them, engaged in their culture, and they loved him because he gave of himself, expecting absolutely nothing in return. A great example. When the project was over and he came home, he always tried to keep the contact with the people he had grown to love. He truly believed in the old adage, if you give a man a fish, he's good for the day. If you teach him how to fish and enhance him with a skill, he will be good for a lifetime. Let's talk about fishing. Ken always loved to talk about his family. I enjoyed hearing about his fishing trips down at the ocean with his grandsons. Most of them are pretty funny because typically something real weird would happen during the excursion that they went on, and they had a new story to tell. We all know how much Ken loved to fish. He not only loved it, he was very good at it. I recall opening days of trout fishing up at Clear Lake by the Bald Hills just outside of Yellow, Washington, where Harold and Thor and Connie and I had lake cabins, and we would gather up there for the family. Ken was a true fisherman. He would be the first one up in the morning, trolling out on the lake, and have his first limit before I got out of bed. I would be sitting by the campfire, eating his first catch of trout for breakfast, while he was out on the lake getting his second limit. We won't mention that one to the game warden. Everyone wanted to fish with Ken. It was kind of comical. You could always tell his boat out on the lake from a distance because it was loaded down with people. It kind of looked like a charter boat out of Westport, about ready to sink. I remember we would all even have discussions around the campfire the night before fishing, and we would discuss who got to go in Ken's boat. People knew who to go with to make it happen, to be successful. That could also be said beyond fishing. Ken always wanted to do things right, to be successful, and to help people learn to do things better. About 4 or 5 years ago, there was a time when Ken was attending Bethlehem Lutheran Church over on 38th off Pacific Avenue, where Connie and I, my wife and I, attend church. We would, of course, sit together in the pew together as a family, and Ken and I loved to talk. We would talk about anything and everything. And eventually, typically, the volume would start to go up. In respect for the church sanctuary, and in consideration of people around us, we would often cup our hands and we would talk back and forth in the church pew. Well, that was fine for a while. My wife Connie would be sitting next to me. Eventually I would get one of these elbow jabs in the rib cage. And she would lean over in the pew and look at Ken and I, and she would say, "Would you two be quiet? The pastor's trying to give a sermon up here." Oh boy. Here we were, two grown men in trouble at church.
Getting in trouble by your wife.
At that time, Ken was actually studying the Bible. He had a study guide at home that he was using to help him with the scriptures. He was attending an adult Bible study at Bethlehem Lutheran after church services. Ken was a man of inquiry. I think his mission from talking to him, like with people, he wanted to understand what makes God tick. What makes this guy get up in the morning and deal with our fallen humanity in the spirit of grace, mercy, love, and forgiveness? After the worship service, 90% of the time, Connie and I would head directly home, and Ken went directly down to the church basement to attend his Bible study. A couple of times, my wife and I went with Ken down to the basement, and we sat in on the classes with him, just to see what was going on, maybe participate a little bit. Ken was never hesitant or bashful about challenging religious concepts. However, he would do it in such a wonderful way. He would always use real-life events that had occurred to him, whether he was working overseas or working life at home, conflicts with people or life. He would use these real-life events to lay the foundation for what he had to say. The pastors and the people in the class loved him, and I know that for a fact because I was there and I witnessed it. We sat around these tables, semicircle tables, in the classroom, and the pastor would typically be up at the whiteboard reading something from the Bible or possibly using some of the class materials for discussion. Sure enough, Ken Nilsen's hand would slowly go up during the pastor's presentation. Well, of course, we all in the class would look over at Ken, and we would stare at him with great anticipation because we knew he was going to challenge that idea. He would say, "Excuse me, Pastor, I have something to say about that. Let me tell you about my real life event. This was the situation. This is what I did. This was the end result." And then many times he would say, "As a frail human being, I think God is asking too much of me on this one. I think he will forgive me if I don't accept it." Ironically, about 50% of the class would look at each other and they would agree with him. He loved to make people think outside of the box, not to necessarily go with the flow. That was the way Ken was. He would listen to you carefully, and then he would give you that Ken Nilsen look that we all know. You know, the eyes would kind of squint, forehead would start to wrinkle, and then that Nilsen smile would emerge on his face. And you just knew he had something to tell you. Thank you.
Awesome.